Well, we're going to get started right away, and I'd like to call up our first panel of the morning, where we'll be looking at Beyond 10X. What are some of the next steps for the National Commission on Innovation and Competitiveness Frontiers? So if I could have joining me on the stage our moderator, Deborah Wentz-Smith, the President and CEO of the Council on Competitiveness, the Vice President for Research and Partnerships at the University of Oklahoma, Dr. Tomas Diaz de la Rubia, the President of the University of Minnesota, and the Board Vice Chair of the Council on Competitiveness, Joan Gable, the President of Dakota State University, Dr. Jose Marie Griffiths, and the Managing Director and Co-Founder of Spring Ridge Ventures, Mr. Andy Thompson, and our great, fantastic colleague, the President and CEO of the Detroit Regional Chamber, and a member of the Council on Competitiveness family, Sandy Barua. Deborah, stage is yours.
Launch meeting. Chat with really an amazing entrepreneur. Justin Siegel was really very, very illuminating. I think we all saw the reality of what it takes to build these businesses of the future, and that here at UC Davis, you're creating a new food innovation industry at the forefront. So thank you very much, and we all loved our little gift of honey too from UC Davis, but thank you very much, and your team did a lovely job. Well, this is going to be an exciting panel because we're going to be, yes, looking to the future, as during our work today and continuing in the commission, we work on issues right now, but we're going to really focus on over the horizon and think of some of the big issues that are not yet perhaps ripe, but that we need to understand and be aware of and really have on our innovation and competitiveness radar. And, you know, as I said yesterday, since we produced and launched and carried forward our seminal Competing in the Next Economy report in December of 2020, so much has changed in the world on the economic front, of course, in the United States with growing inflation, issues around full-time work, not work, who's employed, who's not, the impact on our mortgages, people's ability to buy a home, food prices, et cetera, then of course compounded by geopolitical events with Putin's invasion of Ukraine, how it's impacted energy security, energy scarcity, and the rising issues around competition with a very aggressive militarizing China, as well, of course, as issues around dealing with these big issues of our time, addressing climate, urbanization, and the whole prosperity agenda for the world. So we have a lot to address, and I thought we would start with our distinguished Vice Chair of the Council on Competitiveness, Dr. Joan Gable, who is the President of University of Minnesota, previously the Provost of University of South Carolina, where I first had the honor to get to know you. And thank you for your leadership of the Council, but I want you to really kind of kick us off with what you see are some of these big over-the-horizon issues, leading a great university in a major industrial area that's at the heart of our country, but also a place that there have been a lot of challenges. So, Joan.
Thank you, Deborah, and good morning, everybody. It's great to be here, and thanks to the Council for bringing us together in this way and giving us the opportunity to think about these questions. So, yesterday you heard from my colleague, Shashank Priya, about some of the specific things we're doing at the University of Minnesota around place-based innovation and regional innovation and elevating a specific area in order to create global competitiveness. For the University of Minnesota, we have a somewhat unique lens on this because we sit in a metro. I know many of us don't. And in that metro specifically are multiple headquartered companies. And so our place-based economy is also global by its very definition. But I think what we have to think about in order to make this work is what it means to be place-based and engaged in these complex partnerships no matter where we are, and often thinking in new ways about who our partners need to be and how we make those partnerships productive, viable, digestible, if you will, and effective. So for us at the University of Minnesota and the Twin Cities campus, this involves creating very accessible co-location with our neighbors who happen to be headquartered companies in order to think about how we work together around innovation, R&D, student development, what this can do to drive discovery and the incentives that creates for our local economy. But we're not only in the Twin Cities. The University of Minnesota is the only research university in the state of Minnesota, so we also think about what this means in Rochester, where we have a campus in partnership with the Mayo Clinic, what it means in the more rural areas where we are heavily tied in agri-food and the food economy in the way that I know that we talk about a lot here in Davis, and for the rest of us that are at land grants. And also there's a very significant effort in the state of Minnesota around sustainability and the environment, given the both pride and need for the natural resources in the state. And so as we look around the corner as a university that by its very name and purpose is place-based, and think about what it means to be globally competitive, I think we all need to be thinking about what it takes in the communities that we serve to create these get through to these complicated partnerships, very much in the way that the council models for us, so that we can think about how we all get better together. I'll give you a specific example that I'll give you two, actually. So one is that when we think about state and federal partnerships, I think it goes without saying that without those resources and those partnerships, we can't accomplish what we need to accomplish. But state governments and federal governments operate on political timelines, often in 2 or 4 year increments. We think long term, or we try to, and thinking about how that works together on their time cycle with ours, I think has been a bridge too far in many cases. We have to push through that, as an example. Corporate partnerships, often perfectly desirable, but somewhat disincentive by the way in which we measure success through federal support, and the need to rethink what it means to be engaged with corporate partners who in many ways are driving the entire R&D edge for this country, both locally, place-based, and with a global perspective. And then the last thing I'll mention, referring back to Gary's video, which I thought was lovely, Gary. No need to feel awkward watching oneself on screen, as I think all of us can relate, is that it needs to go upstream in terms of leveraging diverse perspectives. If we aren't thinking about our pipeline of students from their very earliest days into the fields that will put them on our campuses, but also into the positions that allow them to be innovative, we will lose because the rest of the world is doing this. And so while we think about university life starting at age 18, and even more so in this space with graduate students, we also need to be thinking about preschool students and everything along the way and in between, and what our role is in that space.
Excuse me. Thank you, Joan. And before I turn to our next panelist, I want to ask you just one question about the leadership of the university in a tremendously dense environment of major corporations across different fields, from medical devices and food and 3M, et cetera, How do you as a university work with those universities in, yes, partnerships, but also their role in stimulating this next generation of leaders and entrepreneurship? Because they have in many ways beyond the capacity of any venture capitalist.
Well, that's really true, and it's interesting that you say that, because while there is venture capital in our ecosystem, largely because the wealth, if you will, is from legacy companies, many of which were created by virtue of innovation at the University of Minnesota, a lot of what would typically be the component of the ecosystem filled by angel or venture capital is actually filled by corporate acquisition, often at earlier stages than you would see in other markets. And so when you say to a CEO or the C-suite executives, you've got to think about the pipeline, of course they nod and agree because it's true, but they would see that as our role. Or they often, and I'm speaking even in the recent past, would say, yes, we will do some service in K through 12 because we're neighbors and we need to be good partners, but we don't actually see that as our role. So sure, we'll philanthropically support a summer camp or a campus visit program or an outreach or an after-school thing, but we don't actually see the development of early talent as our role. And I think that has changed by virtue of a variety of circumstances, some of which were very tragic and painful, but that had perhaps the thin silver lining of calling the question of the role that we all play in ensuring access and equity and opportunity, and also necessity if we're going to remain the country that we want to be and make sure that we are able to think innovatively across our entire pool of beautifully diverse perspectives. And so some of this is the external circumstances, simply calling the question, and then the other is us sort of saying, remember that question that was called over and over again, and not letting the rubber band snap back in the way that it often does when things like this happen.
Thank you. We'll come back to some of those points that you've made in the discussion. I'm going to turn to you, Tomas, because you're wearing kind of two hats here. You're, the Senior Vice President of Research now at Oklahoma University. You had been at Purdue, but you really also are a leader in our national laboratory infrastructure, having been the Deputy Director for Science at Livermore. And I want to ask you, you've been working throughout your career as a material scientist, at the fulcrum of research and development, its commercial application, but very much the national security environment. Mm-hmm. So I'd like you to kind of address what are some of these big over-the-horizon challenges and realities as we develop these capabilities and technologies that are changing our world, but have profound defense implications. And I will just set you up. I know at OU, since I'm on your advisory board, that you're doing incredible things in hypersonics and critical materials, et cetera, et cetera. So illuminate us a little bit on the future here in this area.
All right, thank you, Deborah, and thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. It's great to be back with the council. Let me start by saying that, we certainly, I think we all recognize that we live in a very, very different geopolitical environment today than we did even 5 years ago. Being at a university today, having been at the National Security Laboratory in the past, I've seen the transition from the end of the Cold War, when we were all friends around the world. China was a friend, Russia was a friend, to today, where everything is looked at from the lens of peer competition, near peer and peer adversaries. The pacing threat to national security in the national defense strategy is China. We still live today, to some extent, in an environment in which, openness trumps everything, as it should. That's the basis under which we have been able to develop the largest economy, the most successful, the most innovative, the most creative and diverse economy in the planet. But we face threats today that we cannot get away from. At the University of Oklahoma, it is our very strong belief that as a public research university, as a flagship university in the state, it is our duty to participate and help our nation, our warfighters, succeed against the adversary. So we have been launching, as you said, some very significant programs in national security. We have concluded that it is necessary for us to have facility security clearances and to have areas of the university in which we're able to do classified work. I understand that that's not the case for many, many universities. I serve on the Defense Science Board, and we have this conversation at the Pentagon very often. But we believe that we need to create those partnerships with the private sector, with the Department of Defense and the services, with the national laboratories, where universities can play a key role in advancing innovation, in generating the discoveries that can be quickly translated through the ecosystem into solutions to the warfighter in the field. The threats that we face today from China, we see what's going on in Ukraine, are real, and they're not going away anytime soon. And so, at the same time with that, the fact is that today global technology is a global effort. Technology happens around the world. Technology moves exponentially fast. Innovation emerges from anywhere in the world. There is no guarantee anymore that we, the United States, can have the competitive advantage, both in the economy and on the defense side, to prevent the adversary from getting ahead. So we have to move really fast. That's the other side of this. At the same time as we face this threat, we also know that we have to innovate faster. We have to translate new ideas and technologies into the field faster, and we have to stay ahead of the adversary. So that's what we're focused on. We're doing that, as I said, with our Department of Defense partners in areas such as radar technology, advanced radar technology, digital phase array radar that also has applications in weather prediction. We're doing that across the manufacturing and material space with the Air Force and the Army. We're doing that in all the areas where we think we have the capability, and this is what I try to encourage with other colleagues, where universities have unique capabilities, unique strengths that can really bring value to our national security enterprise.
Thank you, Tomas. Just continuing that a moment. Also, of course, you're involving industrial partners in this, including, some interesting investors in the national security space, in the private equity and VC. But, and I'll come back to this in the next round. I also, just to give you a heads up, I do want you to share with us the energy commercial security implications of the National Ignition Facility at NIFT and reaching laser fusion. You could do that now or later, but I know you're jumping out of your seat because you were involved in this for many, many years, and it's really incredible story. I'll let you go ahead and tell it now.
All right. Thank you, Deborah. You just, touched my happy place. I was really delighted in so many ways that to see the achievement of fusion ignition and energy gain at Lawrence Livermore Lab in December last year, right? Truly a remarkable scientific achievement, a breakthrough that, we've been waiting for a long time. I always tell everybody, nature is never kind. It doesn't like to give up its secrets very easily, and in this case, it really didn't. It took a lot of perseverance, a lot of effort, a lot of ingenuity, and really, really good scientific and engineering and technology work to get there. But they did. I left there in 2013, right as we had not been able to accomplish the ignition in 2012, as Congress expected us to. I guess the science doesn't happen on the time scale that the Congress determines sometimes, surprisingly to some. But that's how it goes. So now we have fusion ignition. And I think what we're looking at, and at the University of Oklahoma, we're very involved working with private sector companies, working with Lawrence Livermore National Lab, creating partnerships and getting students involved in what is the future of fusion energy. How do we go from a scientific breakthrough in the laboratory to commercial fusion? How do we create and reduce the technology risks that are necessary to go from this magnificent, in my opinion, Nobel Prize deserving scientific achievement to a technology that can be commercialized globally? Because at the end of the day, look, I was just compiling this a couple days ago. The US government right now is spending well over $400 billion in tax incentives and research incentives for clean, sustainable energy. Over $400 billion. The hydrogen hubs, $10 billion. Carbon capture and sequestration, many billions. Direct air capture of carbon, which, 3 billion, 4 billion, billions. These are billions, not millions. I mean, always with a B. Fusion energy, 25 million. So there is a disconnect there where I think, the private sector has woken up to this. There's a lot of venture capital investment going into fusion ideas. But I believe very strongly that we are now at a point in which U.S. competitiveness in the energy markets, global energy markets of the future, will be dependent on our ability to be the first to market in bringing fusion energy as a global solution, clean, sustainable, global energy solution to the planet. And so I certainly hope that we accelerate, that we don't sit back and say, this is hard, this is not going to happen. There's all kinds of deniers out there. Fusion is going to get there too fast. It's never going to happen. It will happen. The question to me is, will it happen here Will it happen in China? Where will it happen? I hope it happens here. So we are devoted to, again, working with the private sector, with the government, with the national labs, to create the workforce of the future that will help the United States and the world access fusion energy as, the clean, sustainable energy solution for the future.
Thank you. And I think some in the room, and certainly in the council, remember when we were doing our seminal work in the beginning of the Obama administration on the intersection of advanced manufacturing and the energy transformation. We were asked to come over to the White House by Ron Bloom, who was President Obama's manufacturing czar. And he was very interested in the council's work on making the business case for leadership in high-performance computing and how that could impact our manufacturing competitiveness. And all of that work ended up creating the huge public-private partnership of the National Digital Manufacturing Computing Initiative that we actually developed at the council with private sector and public sector money. But Ron Bloom had never been to a national lab. That's why I have to tell this story. Never been to a national lab. Was talking about the computing capabilities, at Los Alamos and Livermore and Sandia, that are on a massive scale outside of industry or academia for national security. So he said, well, I'm busy. Why should I go there? Blah, blah, blah. And I said, because they're creating a star on Earth. And he said, I have to go see that star. So he went out to Livermore, and he was blown away by what was happening at the National Ignition Facility. And I just share that because, I'm an archaeologist, and sometimes the language you use to talk about something that's so complex, if I tried to talk about NIF and, all this stuff, he would have been, oh my God, get her out of my office. But instead I said, a star on Earth, and he was there.
And he was there.
And that was a great day. Yes. Marie Joseph, let me turn to you. And I'm sorry, I have a little frog. I guess some of us have a little bit of a cold here. Not because of your weather, Gary, but you have a very interesting background as well. You came from England, but you're here with us as an American, and you have played a very strong leadership role on the National Science Board. And when we had an interesting conversation not too long ago, and I looked at some of your videos, which are brilliant, you talked about, we are no longer the little house on the prairie. We are the place for cybersecurity. And so you also are playing a role in the transformation of universities, their public universities, their role in national security, but very importantly, training the next generation of leaders that often are first generation. And so thank you for joining us, and we want to hear the story about what you're doing out at Dakota State University.
Thank you very much, Deborah, and thank you for inviting me to be here. This is my first meeting, and I only knew one person here before I arrived, and now I know a lot of people here, so it's been a great meeting. Dakota State, yes, I was testifying in Congress soon after I went there, and I was sitting alongside representatives from major universities, and I thought, how do I introduce myself? So I did say, I'm from the little university on the prairie. We're literally about 40 miles from where Laura Ingalls Wilder grew up, so it's real. And now we consider ourselves the cyber powerhouse on the plains, which rings much more nicely. When I arrived, a long time ago, 1984 actually, the university was about to close and become a women's prison. And the legislature and the governor at that point was trying to respond to Citibank, having set up a regional headquarters in Sioux Falls, and Citibank needed mainframe programmers. And so Dakota State was given a new mission, which was to support the growing computing industry in South Dakota. And we took that and ran with it. In 2004, we became involved in cybersecurity and developed a very, very strong relationship with the National Security Agency. But I arrived in 2015, and I found we were really very, very highly thought of in the cybersecurity arena. However, we were not performing much research. So I'm a researcher at heart, so we set about creating a research culture at the university. We built a major new research facility, which includes a portion of the facility that is for classified research. we found that our graduates were doing very well in the security environment. And so once we built that facility, our classified research grew by leaps and bounds. We also had an unclassified area. We called it the Madison Cyber Lab, so we could name it the Mad Labs, and everybody loved that. That's for doing other cyber-related work, not just cybersecurity, but using technology for all sorts of purposes. And I had been at the University of North Carolina, and the founding discussion at the University of North Carolina, when founders decided to create this university, they traveled the state with the first faculty and said, bring us your problems. You know, we are a state university, we're here for you. And so we took that to heart, and we have asked the community to come to us with their problems relating to computing and cybersecurity and networking, etc. So we have a classified piece that's serving the National Security and Defense Mission, and we have another research mission with multidisciplinary labs supporting problems that people have outside the university. And from that, sometimes we can spin off. We're starting to spin off a couple of small startups from that work. But the other thing we felt, as more people were coming for research, was that we needed to expand the facility. So we're now in the process of building another facility with public-private funding. The state, philanthropy, and the city of Sioux Falls have committed between them $90 million for us to build this. So huge for a little university in the middle of the plains. The one other thing we're doing, so we're creating the jobs, the environment, the jobs for the people who are going to graduate from the institution. We also wanted to look at pipeline. And so we've been working with, for about 5 years with school districts to create programs, dual credit programs, where the students can take basically a year of college while they're still in high school, but not general education courses, courses in the majors. And we're now launching, this coming fall, the Governor's Cyber Academy. We gave it that name, so governors going on and on and on will support it because it's Governor's Cyber Academy, plural. And we're putting that opportunity into every high school in the state and for homeschooled students as well. They'll be able to participate and get digital badges along the way. It will be run like a real academy. We're going to sort of divide the English people in the room would understand this, divide people into houses for internal competition and community development. Think Hogwarts, okay? And we're doing that. And so this is the way we intend to bring more young people into the field of cyber and cybersecurity.
Thank you. And I know you told me that when many of your undergraduates get their degree, they all have very high security clearances and they get immediate jobs in an area where we have huge need.
We have across the board a 99% placement rate.
99% placement rate. So that's tremendous. Well, our next panelist, and I'm going to save Sandy Barua to the very end for a variety of reasons. I'm looking at, get worried, Sandy.
Every time I'm with you, I'm worried.
Okay.
It usually means more work.
That's true, too. But this is also for Paul Monk's benefit. You know, we have another former Englishman that we've captured over here in America, and that's Andy Thompson. And Andy is a tremendous innovator, an entrepreneur, a change agent, and a big thinker about organizational change and how we need to rethink how we work and live and things for this new future. So, Andy, from your perspective, and I know you've done many amazing things from healthcare, et cetera, to education. Give us some insight into how we're going to be living in the future and how we need to change our organizational mindset to reach these new places of the future.
Deborah, thank you very much. I'm going to talk about biology and technology, education and technology, and then energy and technology. But everything's to do with technology. So I think in the biology and technology sphere, it's really important that we have a mind shift and an organizational shift away from investing in sick care and starting to invest in healthcare and creating a healthcare system to complement the sick care system we all built in the last century. Ag tech, by the way, and food tech is going to be really, really important in that. The biggest drug we put into our bodies is what we eat. So that means we're going to start to focus on prediction and prevention as opposed to diagnosis and treatment, and that will represent a fundamental shift in the economics of how we buy and invest in things. And then finally, I think in the biology and technology sphere, it would be really, really great if we could shift our pharmaceutical supply chains from India and China to Oklahoma and Kansas. I think that would be a really good move. I know you are. Okay, let's go to education and technology. There's been a lot of talk about how we have to reach much further and be much more good about bringing more people forward in this country. I believe that very passionately. I think we have to have a fundamental shift from a mindset that's about teaching and universal college to a mindset that's about learning and diverse pathways to universal capabilities. There's a lot of dignity in all kinds of work that you can do with your head, your heart, and your hands. It doesn't just have to be stuff that you do with your head. That means also that I think we should stop thinking about how we import technical skills from India and China. We should start thinking about how we build a much stronger K-12 education system in this country that uses technology to enable personalized learning for everyone. And we've talked a lot about how work has changed because you no longer have to physically be present. Well, kids who go to school are the workers. One of the things I do when I go to school sometimes I ask how many people work here, and if they say 60, then they've got it wrong. It's not the teachers, it's the kids. They go to work every day at school. And so you don't have to have the same kind of infrastructure for schools that we used to think about. You can have kids learning remotely, and it can be much more effective, actually, than learning in a physical environment. So that would be education and technology. And then the last section here would be about energy and technology. I was really happy to see that yesterday Paul Monks talked about energy security and climate change or net zero, but energy security came first. That, I think, should be the priority. In the short term, I think we should be deploying small modular nuclear reactors. There's a company in the US called NuScale that in the first quarter of this year got an approval from the federal government for a design for a small modular reactor. This would be a very, very good move. I just note that China deployed on their grid their first small modular reactor in 2021. So we're behind, and we should jump on that. Longer term, of course, nuclear fusion is a huge opportunity. Thomas, you just described how the federal government is putting about 25 million into that, you said? I think something like that. There's a company in Washington State called Helion. They've raised about 1.5 billion. They are, I think, going to be the commercial leader. Some of you may have heard of Sam Altman. He is the largest investor in that company, and I think it's very, very promising. So nuclear fusion may be here sooner than we think, and it's going to be because of potentially private sector initiatives. I just think it's really important that everybody take on board that we cannot make ourselves dependent on Russian gas and Chinese rare earth minerals. It's just a really bad idea. And so energy security has to be the number one priority. So those would be my 3 points.
Thank you. And you did mention an issue I wanted to bring out, and we'll do it now before I turn to Sandy. And that is the issue of rare earths, critical materials. I just read today the United States and Japan just signed a major under the presidential agreement partnership in rare earths. Sweden has a new discovery. There's a big partnership between the United States and the EU. What's going on in that arena from the research? Anybody jump into this on the research perspective that can take us beyond having to depend on physical rare earths and move into the synthetic realm? So whoever wants to jump into that. You're a material scientist.
So I was going to make a comment, Deborah, that yes, I mean synthetic rare earths or new materials will be important, but also we're handicapped by our own environmental protection energy agency restrictions. Right? We have, for example, in Nevada, a lot of lithium that we cannot mine today because of all the restrictions that the federal government is putting on those activities. And so I think it's a combination. I mean, I think we ourselves have to be more agile when it comes to the regulatory environment that allows for the extraction of these rare earths here in the United States.
Well, that's actually a very good policy recommendation as we move forward in the second phase, because looking at the regulatory impediments, barriers, to our innovation future is part of our agenda.
I'd just like to comment on, so we're obsessed with the rare earths because that's what we know we can use. Everybody here in this room has been learning about ChatGPT-3, and I confess I've been looking at ChatGPT-3 for 2 years. So it's a generative AI. It's a language-based generative AI. There are all kinds of people working on other generative AIs. So I advising and working and investing in a company that's got a generative AI for chemistry. And what that means is it's actually coming up with all kinds of synthetic chemical compounds that have properties that people want that could make interesting new pharmaceuticals. And these aren't necessarily naturally occurring chemical entities. Exactly the same thing is going to happen in material science. And so the opportunity here potentially is not to just say, let's dig up loads of lithium everywhere, but to say, what are the material qualities that we need? How do we develop a generative AI that can define those qualities? And then how do we actually synthetically manufacture those products?
Thank you. I want to turn now to Sandy Barua, and the whole theme of place-based innovation is really infusing all of our discussions and really all of the 4 pillars of the next phase of this National Commission. And Sandy, you have been a tremendous leader in our country. Thank you for your service as the Assistant Secretary of Economic Development in the Commerce Department. We had many great partnerships with you. You were an innovator there in how the investments were made, and then you went on to lead the Small Business Administration, and now for some years have been the President and CEO of the Detroit Chamber of Commerce, which of course brings together some of our greatest large-scale enterprises that shape the world, the auto companies, suppliers, and things. And you also arrived at Detroit at a time of deep, deep recession, people leaving. I remember when I visited you, there were empty blocks. It was a pretty depressing place. And yet there's been a turnaround and a transformation, and I know you played a role in that. So tell us a little bit about that story, and then go where you want in some of the next generation issues. But again, thank you for your role in not just being a policymaker and investor, but a practitioner of successful place-based innovation.
Well, wow, Deborah, that's amazing. Thank you so much. You're very kind. And first, my congratulations and my thanks to the leadership of Deborah and Chad and Bill and the council for their incredible work. I've had the honor and pleasure of being associated with the council now, 20 plus years now. I think Tomas and I are truly the old guys in the room. So, to the extent I've been able to accomplish anything, it's because of this long relationship with the council. I want to flip Deborah's question around just a little bit. I want to start at the high level, and then we can get into a little bit more detail about what's happened in Michigan and the auto industry and the city of Detroit in particular. But when I initially talked to Deborah and Chad about this assignment that they gave me, hey, come to UC Davis and talk a little bit about your sordid background. In addition to that, I was in the business sector for a while, did M&A work, and grew up on Capitol Hill, and basically I haven't been able to keep a job. And when I think of the question that we're all here today to focus on, which is kind of like beyond the 10x, what are the BHAG questions that leaders in the room like you all need to address? I really kind of think of 3 big things, and one is one that I mentioned yesterday in a breakout session, is that what is the role for leaders like you in the room about perhaps the biggest challenge America faces today, and that is our sense of cohesion, our sense of culture. We live in this really, I would say, scary time in America, where there really is just there's not a forward vision that we share as Americans, and we don't have kind of a combined view. And let me just give you some. We do a lot of statewide polling in Michigan, and we just had a poll that dropped not too long ago. So in the state of Michigan, which obviously is not California, but it's like lots of parts of California. Let's see, is it, let me get the numbers right here. Think about the EV transition, right? So here we are in Michigan trying to lead the EV transition, be one of the global centers of it. 17% of Michiganders believe that our companies, Ford, Stellantis, GM, et cetera, are moving to EV platforms because of market forces and consumer demand. 17%. The rest, the 70 some odd percent, believe is that they're caving into environmentalists and or they're caving into government. So think about that. So if we're trying to be a global center for electrification and next generation mobility, how do you do that when your populace is not on the same page? 70% of Michiganders believe that a high school degree is the minimum level to lead a successful life going forward in the 21st century. And so these are big disconnects in terms of where the populace is versus where we know we need to move the country in the 21st century. Related, of course, we know that we have this huge political schism, and I'll give you some numbers there. Is college worth it? Democrats, 65% say yes. Republicans, 40% say yes. And by the way, that has changed dramatically in the generation when I started in national politics. Is our economy expanding or contracting? Expanding, Democrats 60%, Republicans 15%. Do you support the shift from ICE engines to EV electrification? Democrats 70%, Republicans 20%. So this whole question about where our populace is has a direct impact on our ability to kind of move where we're going. Second thing is around education, and I just want to add another thought to what's already been shared around education. After World War II, we moved as a society from a 7th grade education being the standard over the next 15, almost 20 years to the high school standard that we have today. It is completely ridiculous that we think that a high school education today is sufficient to sustain a person, a family, a community, business needs into the 21st century. So we need to be thinking about a 12 plus 2 standard that somehow everyone needs to have some post-secondary credential, because without that, our educational attainment rate in the country is about 63%. 63% have something beyond a high school degree, either a skilled certificate, a 2-year degree, or a 4-year degree. That's just not going to cut it going forward. And third, kind of big picture, and this is where I spent a lot of my career, both today in Detroit and Michigan, but also when I was in the federal government, is how do we build structures that stand the test of time? A lot of the issues that we've been talking about today, either at this meeting or just in our general lives, we're thinking about the war in Ukraine. We're thinking about kind of generationally high inflation rate. We're thinking about how to capitalize on this incredible largesse that the federal government has, and we're all thinking about how do we spend it, how do we get it, how do we make most effective use of it. But what we're not really thinking about is what is the structure that needs to be built at the federal level, at the state level, and at the regional level that allows regions, states, and the federal government to be constantly adapting to whatever the challenge is today. I mean, what happens is, and I'm responsible for this, I mean, the whole, Secretary McNamara line, when you talk to people, it's like, I've wasted more government money than anyone else in the room, and I'm probably that guy in this room because I spent so much time in the federal government, so I've wasted a lot of federal dollars. We create programs at the federal level, we create institutions at the local level, and we don't do anything with them. That we just kind of assume that what was created in 1990 or 1950 or 2023 is going to be the same organization or the same need that we're going to need going forward. So how is it that we create these organizations that build capacity, not organizations that are built to do one thing or a portfolio of things, but this, how do you build capacity at this level? So regardless what the challenge is, if it's cybersecurity, if it's a threat from Japan, which is why the council was originally created during the Reagan administration, as those challenges and opportunities evolve, how are we building those structures? I mean, we certainly did that in Michigan and Detroit, and some of that has worked and some of that has not worked. I'll turn it back over to Deborah, but we can get into what's worked and what hasn't later on, perhaps. So thanks.
Thank you, Sandy. Well, let's continue on the issue of what we need to do to accelerate really in the next phase of the place-based innovation. Because at the end of the day, if we don't have a country, as we've talked about all day yesterday, not just with equal opportunity, but the ability to accelerate that opportunity in creating value, we are going to be in a very, very difficult place, and we're going to regret what we bequeath to our children and grandchildren. So what are some of the disruptive strategies we could begin to think about to really build these institutions, build this capacity for place-based innovation in a way that's not just doing little incremental things. And that's always, you know, the tyranny of incremental things. And I'm going to turn to you, Marie-Jo, because you all did something very big in what you have described. In a state, I mean, I was looking at some of the ladies in the room and thinking, oh God, the women's prison is the Dakota. We don't want to go there. But look what you've created.
Well, thanks, Deborah. On a small scale, we created something that is interesting. But in terms of place-based, I do think that we have to recognize that there are many, many such places with pockets of expertise in the country that have not been exploited. And bringing them into the mix, I think, could help us at the national level. It's just a question of identifying what the strengths are in a number of places. Similarly, as we think about hubs, think about the notion of innovation hubs. You tend to think of a hub as a center and then a bunch of spokes. What if you don't actually have a single center? What if you just have a bunch all connected together? We've done that in the Mountain Plains region, a 5-state consortium of 10 or 11 research universities with a variety of different areas of expertise. Not that we all have to be involved in everything, but we're working together so that we can begin to address how can we work together in areas that make sense. I think there's a tremendous amount there. There's one other question or issue I'd want to bring up. Since a lot of my time in the last few years has been focused on the national security side of things, what about the time frame for these things? How urgent is it that we move? Where do we need to move quickly in order to have an effect? And where can we begin to build the future that probably will take somewhat longer? So the issue of time frame, I think, is important as well.
Joan, back to you on these. Anything you want to address, but also
Sure.
back to your leadership at Minnesota University.
Thank you. So I have two sides to the coin that I would throw out there for your thoughts and consideration. So one is, on the one side, our role in the workforce preparation, which is different, I think, than a 4-year degree of days gone by. That when you think about K-12 plus 2, I think we've always thought of that 2 as a 2-year degree, but we can do a lot in those 2 years. We have a 4-year degree that we're now able to offer in 2.5 years by virtue of competency-based credits and new ways of thinking about what it means to impart information. One of the silver linings of the pandemic being the widespread adoption of technology in the classroom that previously was only reserved for very specific types of courses or pedagogy. So a refreshed thinking about what it means to have people prepared for the workforce at a level that makes them competitive. That's one side of the coin. My concern is that in the interest of creating equity and attainment opportunities that are absolutely available across the board, regardless of your starting point or lived experience, that we channel students into workforce preparation, perhaps at the expense of the other side of the coin, which is doctoral level, research level, innovative thinking, that we need more than one classroom of Black engineers. It wouldn't be that much better today. And there is a danger that we have to be very intentional about making sure that the opportunities to expand what it means to be competitively workforce ready does not come at the expense of what it means to be doctorally prepared to be a scientist. And there needs to be some purpose there.
Thank you. Tomas.
So, following up on those comments, one of the things that we have recently done at the University of Oklahoma was take a page out of Mitch Daniels' playbook at Purdue University, and we launched something we call the University of Oklahoma Polytechnic Institute up in Tulsa. And the idea behind this is actually very simple, is sort of create an environment for students that can thrive in technology areas without having to get necessarily the most rigorous engineering education. So think about it as a sort of an intermediate state between vocational technology and a full engineering 4-year degree. The degrees that will be offered there are in cybersecurity, they will be in data science and artificial intelligence, in digital engineering. There won't be mechanical engineering and chemical engineering, electrical engineering. There will be a foundation of engineering underneath, as in the Purdue Polytechnic Institute. But these degrees are highly sought by companies. Part of our goal in a state like Oklahoma is to open up the aperture to be able to bring students from all social, areas of the social spectrum. Oklahoma has 37 tribes, 5, major Native American tribes. We work very closely with them because we think it's really important to be inclusive. It's really important when we talk, going back to Chancellor May's comments at the very beginning, to bringing everybody into the educational enterprise to create the opportunities to generate the workforce of the future that is going to keep us ahead, that is going to keep us competitive. And so working with the nations, with the tribal nations through the Native Nations Institute at the university, we're being very successful in building these new workforce type training programs, which are rigorously academic, they are accredited, but they're somewhere in between. It gives opportunity to a lot more students to be able to get a degree that is highly sought by industry, 99% placement, right? Go straight into work. And that's one way that we're looking at broadening the aperture and sort of leading from the middle out.
Andy.
There we go. All right. So I think actually the real secret sauce, the reason why America is such a powerful country is freedom. That's the really big thing. And technology has been redefining the future of freedom for the last 20 years, socially, economically, politically, and militarily. And people are just beginning to realize that, but it's very, very powerful. So I think the most important thing that the National Council can recommend is that the government, the federal government, state governments, use technology to promote freedom, and most especially to promote freedom to lift the bottom 20, because the top 20 are doing great. I'll give a real example of this. I'm very close to the government of Estonia. I've been working with them for 30 years. It's the most digital country in the world. They have the second or third most productive tech economy in the world. This is a tiny little country with 1.3 million people. They've done 7 elections where you can vote on a mobile phone. We're talking about using the post office. 99% of all government services in that country are delivered over a secure spine run by the government called the X-Road. We hosted the president of Estonia at our home in California just a couple of years ago. We do it every year. But Kersti Kaljulaid was there, and she was describing what we do in Estonia. And somebody who you would all know, a household name in Silicon Valley, says to her, well, that sounds great, but what happens if you don't have access to the internet? So she spins on her heels and smiles. In my country, that is not possible. They had universal Wi-Fi in Estonia in 2000. They had every high school student with a computer on their desk in 1997. They teach kindergartners to code. It's happening today. It's been happening for a decade. So this is a country that is consciously using technology to promote freedom and most especially to lift the bottom 20. I'll make another point here. Their success in building a citizen-centric digital society is in part enabled because in 1992, when this country got out from under the yoke of the Soviet Union, they had no money, no government, no civic institutions, and no big companies. They had no GDP. They had no one to stop them. We've heard a lot of talk here about how much money is required, but in Estonia, they had no money, and yet they've vaulted to a point where in 2022, Estonia's GDP is bigger than Japan. Staggering. And it's all because they've used digital tools to promote freedom and to lift the bottom 20. My suggestion, I think the National Council should partner with heartland states. I think you should build regional innovation strategies where barriers to disruption are lower, where appetites for innovation are higher. I just note that Rishi Sunak in December of last year was in Estonia with Kaja Kallas, signed a technology collaboration agreement with that country. I think Kansas and Oklahoma should do that too.
That's great. Sandy, back to you.
So I want to channel my friend Julie Meyer Wright about just the importance of business leadership in corralling all of this. So if you look back just a couple years ago to the height of the pandemic, who did people trust the most? Other than their family doctor, it was actually their employer. And when you look at, who is now, by default, the trusted voice in the community, it is business leaders. So when you think about business leaders working together with academic leaders and civic leaders, having business leaders having a visible role in corralling the region, corralling the state around what they need to do, that just cannot be underestimated. When I talk about wasting government money, when one of the programs I ran was a planning grant program that turned out to be year over year over decades. The same planning grant going to the same organizations, small dollars. They basically just became subsistence programs, and that's the problem with any federal or state program. We know how to create programs. We don't really know how to sustain them in a useful way. So we need to kind of flip that model upside down. Is that when the regions have come together with whoever the business leaders are, whoever the academic leaders are, the civic leaders, and say we have corralled, we are getting our act together, then the federal government can kind of step in and help build that capacity. I think that's a fundamental difference because again, the federal government is a terrific tool. I was so honored to serve in 2 administrations, but it's a blunt instrument. It is a very, very blunt instrument, and we ask the federal government far too often to serve as a scalpel. We need to do that at the state and regional level. Otherwise it won't work. And just to switch gears, completely about education. One of the things that we're fighting for right now and are succeeding on is for K through 12 funding in the state of Michigan. We've moved away from an equality model and we've moved to an equity model. We've been very, very clear that it costs more. It should cost more, and we should be willing to spend the money to educate, harder to educate populations commensurately. And so it's not that all school districts get the same. We are now moving much more to this equity model to acknowledge that, because if we could fix that equity problem, that'll go a long way to resolving equity issues in the nation, not to mention minimizing our ongoing costs for incarceration and social services, et cetera.
Thank you. And Chad's giving me the look that we're literally done, but I do want to give everybody the last minute round of any one big idea, thought that you still wanted to contribute to this Beyond 10X discussion. So we'll go this way and start with you.
I think it's really just to identify where in this country we have real pockets of expertise that have never been fully exploited.
I think that the big education challenge is not about resource, it's about accountability and using technology to innovate the way in which we actually personalize learning and stop focusing on teaching.
So to go beyond 10X, let's commercialize inertial fusion energy in the next decade.
I think it's about dropping our preconceived notions and forming complex partnerships in order to get to the future that we need.
Cultural eat strategy for lunch.
Thank you. And I would say, somehow working all together of a shared vision for the future that really takes us back to our founding vision as a nation and our leadership, but also does that in a way that everyone in our country is going to be part of those future scenarios that we have to co-create through partnerships. Thank you all. This was a great discussion. Thank you for your leadership where you are and your participation in the council and the work of the commission. Thank you.